Do Christians observe the Sabbath and not just Jews?
Somebody recently sent me this YouTube short by Dr. Gene Kim where he rejects the idea that Jews and Christians should both keep the Sabbath.
Oh, so the 10 Commandments are for Jews only?
No, but wait, it gets even better. He says they will both keep the Sabbath in the future.
In the future? Now I am confused. So he rejects the Sabbath for Christians, but yet says they will keep it in the future? This is getting more and more ridiculous.
Yep. So as you know, we have done a whole series on T.D. Jakes' anti-Sabbath doctrine where he tries to duck and dive through Scripture to avoid the fourth commandment to keep the Sabbath day. But this one by Dr. Kim is really creative, and you will see how he gets himself into a real corner. Well, Dr. Kim is making a desperate attempt to explain away one of the verses we as Sabbath keepers use. If the Sabbath is only for Jews, then why are believing Gentiles keeping it in Isaiah? So Dr. Kim points out, hey, you know, this is speaking about a future time.
As if we did not know that. It is called prophecy after all.
Yep, nothing new there.
The Bible shows that this verse is talking about at a future time period when Jesus Christ will rule over a kingdom on the earth in Israel. So because of that, all the Gentile nations have to come to Jerusalem and worship him. Obviously, that's not our timeline right now.
So the question remains, why do the Gentiles have to come and worship Yahweh on the Sabbath? Why would they be expected to suddenly keep the Sabbath as part of worshiping Yahweh if Yahushua has supposedly done away with it? Is Yahweh changing his mind?
I do not think Dr. Kim can answer that, can he? He is a Sunday worshipper under Rome who hates the Sabbath and opposes Yahuwah's law, so I cannot imagine Dr. Kim keeping the Sabbath in any timeline.
Is Elohim the author of confusion?
No. Second question. Is this describing pagan Gentiles that are being forced to keep the Sabbath commandments, or are these believing Gentiles who love the Father's commands?
The answer is they are believing Gentiles who keep Torah. Notice what it says. And they shall bring all your brethren for an offering unto Yahweh out of the nations. The word brethren is key here.
Brethren, yes, that's brothers and sisters in Yahushua. Jewish and Gentile believers.
Did Yahushua not define who brethren are? Dr. Kim, this is what Yahushua said. Who is my mother? And who are my brethren? For whosoever shall do the will of my Father, which is in Shamayim, the same is my brother and sister and mother. The will of the Father is that we love him and obey his Torah. For this is the love of Elohim, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. Yahushua tells us that he does the will of the Father. I seek not mine own will, the will of the Father which hath sent me. He tells us that the will of the Father is that we keep the commandments as he has kept them. If ye keep my commandments, ye shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. But if ye believe not his writings, Moses, how shall ye believe my words? We know that Dr. Kim does not believe the words of Yahushua, but rather chases after the lies of Rome and her Sunday profanity of the Sabbath. Dr. Kim says this verse is referring to another timeline and suggests that this somehow makes the Sabbath void for believing Gentiles at this present time. But what timeline does Yahushua apply to all of the Torah, which of course includes the Sabbath? Think not that I am come to destroy the law, Torah, or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till Shamayim and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, Torah, till all be fulfilled. Right? So there is the timeline stamped, approved, and defined by Yahushua. As long as Shamayim and earth remain, we keep Torah. There is no interruption whatsoever mentioned for anybody who is a believer. So Dr. Kim is a liar and deceiver. We are in the timeline on earth keeping Sabbath and the rest of Torah to enter the kingdom. Period. Here's the warning to those who follow false teachers like Dr. Kim. It comes directly from Yahushua to you. Whosoever, therefore. Okay, let's stop there.
Whosoever. Whosoever means anybody, a Jew, a Gentile, an Asian, a barbarian, you name it.
Yep. Whosoever, therefore, shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of Shamayim. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of Shamayim. And here comes the big warning as to who is left out of the kingdom Verse 20. For I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of Shamam. What were the Pharisees doing? They were making void the Torah through vain traditions, just like these agents of Rome today. Dr. Kim, like T.D. Jakes, another agent of Rome, tries to turn the Sabbath day into an eternal 1,000-year Sabbath, or millennial Sabbath, as they sometimes call it, as if this replaces the seventh-day Sabbath. No, it does not. This is false. It does not apply now, nor does it apply in the future. Yahweh gives us a clear direction for the future timeline in the new Shamam and new earth as it applies to the Sabbath day. And this is the one that Dr. Kim should have referred to in Isaiah, but he seems to have avoided it. Isaiah 66:22. For as the new Shamam and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, saith Yahweh, so shall your seed and your name remain. Verse 23. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith Yahweh. Note, you cannot have one Sabbath to another if it is some continuous 1,000-year Sabbath, as Dr. Kim alleges. The Sabbath is a command for day, 24 hours, to be kept by all believers. It was a day, 24 hours kept by Yahweh. We keep it as he kept it as commanded. We know that the people of Elohim are all believers. There remaineth therefore rest, sabbatismos, to the people of Elohim. The sabbatismos is the Greek and literally means Sabbath day keeping, the seventh day in other words. Period. Yahweh's Torah has always been one Torah for both Jews and Gentile believers. Anyone who preaches otherwise is a liar. One law, what does it say? One law and one manner shall be for you, and for the stranger that sojourneth with you. This was before entering Israel even. Yahweh actually commands that Jews ensure their Gentile believers have rest on the Sabbath. Why? So that they keep one and the same Sabbath law, one and the same Torah, period. Exodus 20:10, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of Yahweh thy Elohim. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. In Mark 2:2, Yahshua says the Sabbath was made for Jews.
Hey, the Sabbath is not Jewish.
Quite right. So you're still awake. Sorry, that was the KJV Bible translation. That's the Kim Jiggly version. No, it is written in the KJV, made for man. The Sabbath is made for all men and women who are believers. Dr. Kim twists the scriptures and falls into the error of Torahlessness, just as the Apostle Kepha warns about in 2 Peter 3:16. Dr. Kim makes Apostle Shaul appear to say that we must not let any man judge Christians who are not keeping the Sabbath. But let's hear it from the KJV or Kim Jiggly version himself.
In Colossians chapter 2 even, which is a verse for Christians, they are not to be judged for not observing the Sabbath. Because Paul said that the Sabbath in Colossians 2:16 and 17, Sabbath days are a shadow of things to come. It is a timeline set for the future.
So let's break this up. Dr. Kim assumes that this is for Christians. We know the title Christian is not there, and Shaul never addresses believers by this title. So we will refer to them as Gentile converts. We have an extensive article on this term, Christian, which was erroneously applied to true believers. Click on the link entitled, Do You Really Want to Be Called a Christian? Shaul addresses a famous Gentile who says to Shaul that he is almost making him become a Christian. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. And Paul said, I would to Elohim that not only thou, but also all that hear me this day were both almost and altogether such as I am. Does Shaul say, yes, become a Christian? No, he says, I would want you all to be as I am. He follows Torah, he follows Yahshua, he keeps Sabbath. Just before this, he had told another Gentile, Felix, but this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the Elohim of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law, Torah, and in the prophets. Now, Apostle Shaul was confessing that he follows the Hebrew Mashiach Yahushua, who teaches us to keep Torah. Why would Apostle Shaul now be saying don't judge Gentile converts who do not keep the Sabbath? This would be total confusion. This is ludicrous and a figment of Dr. Kim's jiggly-jelly imagination. New Gentile converts were in fact so hungry to hear the Torah and were wanting to come into the assembly every Sabbath to hear the Torah of Moses, but they were being judged by some Jews who were trying to keep them out as if they were not worthy. This was the whole purpose of the historic Jerusalem Council. Surely Dr. Kim learned of this in theology. The apostles agreed upon the minimal requirements to allow them to start entering the assembly. Wherefore my sentence is that we trouble not them which from among the Gentiles are turned to Elohim. Notice he says we do not trouble them, we do not judge them in the keeping of the Sabbath measured on the basis of man-made traditions. It is not about not judging them for not keeping the Sabbath. It is the total opposite. But that we write unto them that they abstain from pollutions of idols and from fornication and from things strangled and from blood. For Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the assembly places, synagogues every Sabbath day. Dr. Kim's ideas from his theological cemetery hold no water. Historically, the Gentiles and Jews were keeping the Sabbath. It is recorded in numerous extra-biblical accounts, but we do not need to even go there now. In the scriptures, the whole city came to hear Shaul on the Sabbath. This was the day they assembled as commanded. And the next Sabbath day came almost the whole city, Antioch and Pisidia, together to hear the word of Elohim. There was no Sunday, Mr. Kim, until the Catholic Church began to rise up, and yes, they began to judge believers for indeed keeping the Sabbath. In fact, they persecuted many for it and put many to death. But Yahuwah wins over Satan. I'm sorry to tell you, Dr. Kim, that we converted Gentiles and Jews who love Yahuwah, his son, and the Torah are still both keeping the Sabbath today, as Apostle Shaul did. This is despite the false teaching and persecution by Babylon, a.k.a. the Torahless Catholic/Christian Church. Who was Apostle Shaul speaking to here? Was it Jews, Gentiles, or both? Did Shaul keep the Sabbath? Yes. Was he following Yahushua? Yes. So Dr. Kim's divisive doctrine that seeks to make a different law for Gentiles and another for Jews will perish along with Satan, the father of lies. Now, concerning this verse, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Mashiach. We know that the seventh-day Sabbath that we keep on earth is a shadow of the seventh-day Sabbath to come in the new earth, as we showed in the prophecy of Isaiah. So this is what Shaul is speaking about. Keep it as it is a shadow of things to come. In fact, all of the feast days of Yahuwah, known as Moedim in Hebrew, are a foreshadowing of Yahushua's work. Dr. Kim obviously does not seem to be aware of this. That is the Passover, tabernacles, first fruits, trumpets, and so on. And these all have Sabbaths besides the weekly Sabbath. Shaul said, I must keep this feast day. Remember, Shaul also said to the Gentile, Agrippa, be as I am. Was Shaul talking double talk now in Colossians, saying to other Gentiles, don't keep the feast days and their Sabbaths? Of course not. Do we hear him saying, you must rather keep the Pope's Sunday invention? Be good little lost Gentiles. Of course not. But why not? Surely this would have been the best place to say it if it were indeed something that replaced the Sabbath day as these agents of Rome pretend. I'm sure Dr. Jean Kim does, however, judge those who do not keep Sundays in line with the Catholic Church's invented calendar, such as Easter Sunday or Easter Sunday. It's hypocritical and deceptive because they used to call this Sunday invention the Sabbath.
Am I late?
Dr. Rush, what are you doing here?
Me? Why, it's Sunday, Reverend. Even a congressman needs to respect the Sabbath, so I'm coming to church.
Pushing this false interpretation of Colossians of not judging someone for not keeping the Sabbath then would have meant that they could not judge someone for not keeping Sunday either, seeing they want to falsely call it Sabbath, thus shooting themselves in the foot. I guess that is why they later dropped the idea of falsely calling Sunday the Sabbath. The body of Mashiach is not a building or a temple, and the more so since the temple does not stand. All the more we are not to be judged for keeping the Sabbath with or without a temple. Now that word there in verse 17, that word there should be, and rather than the word, but. So Shaul is saying why they cannot judge us, because we know why we keep it.
The book of Colossians was written by the Apostle Paul to the believers in Colossae, which is located in what is today southwest Turkey. I said southwest Turkey. Let that sink in for a second. The site for Colossae in southwest Turkey is over 800 miles driving distance from Jerusalem, located in Judea. Not exactly a place full of Jewish synagogues and legalistic Jewish leaders. But when reading verse 16, it seems to be saying to the readers to not allow themselves to be judged by those who would ridicule them for not keeping the Sabbath, or the new moons, or eat and drink and feast days. Wait a minute. If there are few to no Jews in Colossae, Turkey, 800 miles away from Jerusalem, well then, who is judging these new believers? Could it be that these new believers are not being judged by Jewish legalists, but instead are being judged by pagan idolaters living amongst them? Let's read verse 16 again. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of a holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days. What Paul is saying to the Colossians is not to let any man judge you for eating clean meat, not to let any man judge you for not drinking blood, not to let any man judge you for keeping feast days and observing the new moons or for observing the Sabbath. These were new believers, and they were living amongst pagan Gentiles who commonly ate unclean meats and drank blood. The drinking of blood was even addressed in Acts 15 in the Jerusalem Council headed by James. It was a basic requirement for the new believer. Stop drinking blood, as this was a common practice in those days amongst Gentiles, and in some parts of the world, it's still practiced. These new believers were being judged for keeping biblical festivals, the feast days given in Leviticus 23 that the pagans in the area of southwest Turkey did not participate in.
We are the body of believers. We are the assembly or body of Mashiach.
For Israel, the keeping of these holy days was evidence of obedience to God's law and a sign of her election among the nations. At Colossae, however, the sacred days were to be kept for the sake of the elemental spirits of the universe, those astral powers who directed the course of the stars and relegated the order of the calendar. So Paul is not condemning the use of sacred days or seasons as such. It is the wrong motive involved when the observance of these days is bound up with the recognition of the elemental spirits.
Note the words, let no man judge you. This is key here. No man, because this is a covenant that Yahweh has made with us. It is his law. It is not a man-made thing, just as the covenant of marriage, which is another foreshadow or picture of the marriage covenant between Mashiach, our bridegroom, and we, his bride, the body of believers. Let no man judge you is the same language used in the marriage covenant between a man and his wife. They are joined in covenant by Yahweh and not man. For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore Elohim hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Note, no man can judge or break apart the body of one flesh, what Yahweh has instituted in his covenant, and that includes all of his Torah covenant, which has been renewed in Yahushua. Dr. Kim's Jew and Gentile divisive doctrine is anything but non-dispensationalism. Shaul made this clear. The covenant has made one new man, one flesh in the body of Mashiach. No Jew or Gentile, one law, one Torah, one Sabbath. Having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances for to make in himself of twain one new man, so making shalom. So there are no ordinances of man, such as a Sunday ordinance, that can separate a believing Jew or Gentile from the Sabbath, because they are now clearly one body in Mashiach. And that he might reconcile both unto Elohim in one body by the stake, having slain the enmity thereby. and came and preached shalom to you which were far off, and to them that were nigh. For through him we both have access by one Spirit unto the Father. Now therefore ye are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints, and of the household of Elohim, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Yahushua Mashiach, himself being the chief cornerstone. Now Dr. Kim, if the strangers sojourning among the Jews were to keep the Sabbath, then how much more we who are now? No more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints, and of the household of Elohim. So Dr. Kim's argument becomes a moot point, since there are no more Jews and Gentiles, but saints who are of one household and citizenship keeping Sabbath together. No man can judge you for keeping the Sabbath as a Gentile. You have your citizenship, which you can put in front of their faces and say, I'm a saint of the Most High Elohim, and Yahushua is my appointed master of the Sabbath. It is preposterous to think that if the early saints over 2,000 years ago were to fully accept and apply Dr. Gene Kim's false interpretation, then no Gentile would have been keeping the Sabbath of Shavuot, which is the celebration where we give thanks for the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai. Think about this, my friends. There would have been no Pentecost event. Let me repeat that. There would have been no Pentecost event in your Bible. The whole of Shavuot or Pentecost would have single-handedly been derailed by this interpretation. The prophecy of Jeremiah would have been derailed. The words of Yahushua would have been derailed. Therefore, Peter would not have been able to confirm the prophecy of Jeremiah being fulfilled that day. I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. But we know that Yahuwah's word does not return to him void. Acts 2 verse 1. And when the day of Shavuot was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place, keeping the Sabbath of Shavuot, Jews and Gentiles together, fellow citizens in Mashiach. Yahuwah's Spirit did indeed fall on the Gentiles. How pleasant it is to dwell together in unity. Is this ecumenical unity of the Torahless Catholic Church, which Dr. Kim serves? No, it is unity in the Torah and Sabbath keeping. So Dr. Kim, Jews and Gentiles keeping the Sabbaths together, is marked by one of the most important events for the believers. The renewed covenant was confirmed then. It is continuing now, and it will be in the future with Jews and Gentiles together worshiping on the Sabbaths. What happens to those Gentiles who hate Torah and who hate keeping such Sabbaths? Well, you can read all about it in Zechariah. They will be forced to go up to the Feast of Sukkot Tabernacles in Jerusalem. If they do not, they receive no rain. The Feast of Tabernacles requires the keeping of Sabbaths apart from the weekly Sabbath. Now, of course, Dr. Kim hates that so much that he believes he will fly away in something called a rapture and escape Yahuwah's punishment. Now, who would sell you that lie? Surely none other than Satan himself.
Fly away,